My name is Aaron Walker. I'm 35 years old. And today, I'm standing at the back of my younger brother's Army Ranger graduation in Fort Carson, Colorado, dressed in civilian clothes, like I don't belong. Like I'm nobody. The irony, I'm a colonel in Air Force Special Operations, newly promoted to Brigadier General. But to my family, and everyone else in this crowd, I'm just a disappointing dropout who couldn't hack the academy and settled for an admin job in a Denver office park. I scan the crowd, my eyes skimming over rows of crisp uniforms and family members practically glowing with pride. I don't look at my parents just yet. I know exactly where they're sitting, front and center VIP section, the Walker legacy on full display. My dad, retired Colonel Richard Walker, wearing his old army dress blues like armor. My mom, poised and polished, holding back tears for the son who carried the torch when their daughter let it die. Only one person here knows I didn't let it die. And he's on stage now, General David Rutledge, 4 stars Army legend, and the man who oversaw 2 of the joint ops I helped lead. His eyes sweep across the audience casually until they stop on me. I see it happen. The blink of confusion, the second blink of recognition, then that unmistakable micro-expression military people wear when a classified reality just walked into a public ceremony. I don't breathe, just tilt my chin slightly and shake my head. Discreet, controlled, please not here. He gives a slight nod in return. Not a promise, but an acknowledgement. Before I can continue my story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little community mapped out across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. My family's legacy was the kind built on medals battles and the weight of expectations so heavy it could crush you before your first deployment. Our house looked like a recruiting ad flag on the porch, polished boots by the door brass plaques, and folded flags lining the hallway like ancestors. I grew up believing service was sacred, that one day I'd earn my place in that hallway. But I learned early that not all victories come with parades. Some come with silence. Some are buried so deep you almost forget you ever won at all. My father never meant to make me feel invisible. At least I tell myself that now. But growing up, it was clear he respected warriors, not strategists. Front line, not shadows. So when I joined the Air Force Academy, I was the family hope until I wasn't. Until I left. Until I became the daughter who quit. And yet here I stand. The same base where my brother receives thunderous applause for his service, while mine echoes only in secure rooms behind locked doors and blackout windows. There are no claps for ghosts. But that's the thing about ghosts, we haunt places that once refused to see us. And today, whether I want it or not, someone's about to say my name. My earliest memories smell like boot polish and breakfast bacon. Sunday mornings in our Colorado Springs house always started with the same ritual, my dad ironing creases into his retired uniform just to keep the habit, and my mom humming quietly while she laid out the flag for display. We were a military family in the most traditional, rigid sense. Rules weren't just encouraged, they were sacred. Silence at the dinner table when Dad was speaking. Shoes by the door, bed sheets tucked sharp enough to bounce a quarter. And pride came from obedience rank and being able to name every U.S. battle since Gettysburg in reverse chronological order. I wanted it, desperately. Not the control, but the honor. I wanted to earn my place in the Walker legacy the same way my dad had, through discipline, through grit, through service. At 8, I was reading military strategy manuals under my blanket with a flashlight. At 13, I started running pre-dawn laps around the neighborhood while other kids were still asleep. At 15, I could quote General Petraeus and identify NATO radio call signs by ear. But I wasn't loud about it. Luke was loud. Luke was the golden child with the firework personality, grinning wide, chasing adrenaline, mimicking Dad's posture like it was in his bones. And Dad loved that. Not just the drive, but the visible pride, the echo of himself. Me, I was quieter, more observant. I noticed when my mom stopped singing in the mornings, when Dad's praise for Luke didn't match what he said to his war buddies over scotch in the living room. My daughter's got a good brain. Not sure she's built for the real stuff, though. Real stuff. That phrase clung to me like static, because in his mind, real stuff meant action, combat, blood and steel and boots on foreign soil. It never meant subtlety or silence or intel that saved lives without anyone knowing a shot had been fired. When I got accepted to the Air Force Academy, my dad cried. The first and only time I saw him cry in my youth. He hugged me like I'd finally passed some invisible test. That night, he took out a cigar he'd been saving since I was born. Said he'd always believed I'd find my path. And God help me, I believed it too. But that celebration had a clock ticking. Because the second I deviated from the visible, decorated frontline trajectory, he had envisioned it all collapsed. My mother, sweet and controlled, slipped into quiet judgment. Just tell your father where your head's at, she whispered one night over dishes, as if I'd committed some moral sin by having private doubts. The Walker family legacy had no room for deviation. You stayed on the path. You became what the uniform needed, or you became less. There was no script for intelligence operatives, no visible medals, no welcome banners, and certainly no template for a daughter who would disappear into classified shadows. But I hadn't disappeared. I'd just been hidden, and what no one in that perfect patriotic household realized was that I was already watching the world in a way none of them could, seeing angles they dismissed, detecting patterns they overlooked. My father could recite tactics, but I saw strategy. I saw movement before it began. And that, I would come to learn, was more dangerous than they ever imagined. It happened during my third year at the academy. I was 19. I still have the notebook I used, then gridded pages filled with mission brief breakdowns, droned path analyses, and encryption schematics no one had assigned, but I studied anyway. I wasn't chasing grades. I was chasing clarity, and apparently someone was watching. It started with an invitation, nondescript. No letterhead, just a folded paper slipped under my dorm door with a time, a location, and the kind of wording that made my pulse pick up preliminary evaluation opportunity. Report unacknowledged. I followed the instructions. Of course I did. My whole life had been preparation for the unknown. What I walked into wasn't an office. It was a simulation chamber 2 floors below the lowest mapped level of the cadet complex. No introductions. Just a voice over the intercom, solve the grid. Identify the leak. You have 10 minutes. It was a counterintelligence scenario designed to test threat recognition under pressure. I solved it in 6. Then they threw another at me, and another. By the third, I realized this wasn't some academic exercise. This was a recruitment test. By the end of that month, I'd been approached off the record, off curriculum, no names, no ranks, by a branch of Special Operations Command that didn't technically exist. They told me my profile fit a critical gap, that my combination of pattern recognition, threat modeling, and cross-disciplinary cognition wasn't just rare, it was necessary. They wanted me, but I couldn't stay. To join, I had to vanish. That meant exiting the academy with a story that wouldn't raise alarms. No medical discharge, no transfer. Just a clean break. They even handed me options. Academic burnout, family emergency. But the simplest, the most believable, I'd failed out. It made me sick. Like actual nausea. I'd bled for that academy. Slept 4 hours a night, memorized fleet structures, trained till my knees screamed, and I was supposed to just drop out. But operational cover meant choosing the story that stuck without follow-ups. Disgraced cadets didn't get questioned. They got ignored. So I took the fall. The first person I told was my mother. I couldn't give details, just enough to let her believe the worst. Her face crumpled like paper under a wet hand. I'd never seen her look so ashamed. You could have at least tried harder, she whispered. I remember the sound of the dish towel twisting in her hands, over and over, like she needed something to wring besides me. Dad never asked why. Not once. Just looked at me like I'd betrayed every generation that came before me. Like I'd torched the family crest. What they didn't know was that the day after I walked off that campus, I boarded a private flight to Virginia. There, in a compound that didn't exist on any satellite map, I began the real training. They shaved off my academy ID, reassigned my existence, and pushed me harder than I'd ever imagined possible. Days started at 4 a.m., ended after midnight. Language immersion, interrogation, resistance, tactical insertion, simulations, cyber reconnaissance. You broke, or you became something new. I became something new, but to my family, I was nothing. I let them believe I'd failed. Because failure was safer than the truth. Because if they knew what I was really doing, they could be used, tracked, targeted. The deeper I went, the more necessary the lie became. I told myself it would all be worth it. That one day I'd be able to explain. That love could wait for security. But I underestimated how quickly silence turns into shame when no one's willing to ask what you're not saying. After the academy dropout, the silence became its own kind of weapon. My father removed my photo from the mantle. Subtle, but not really. It used to sit beside Luke's, the two of us in our ROTC uniforms from high school, standing straight proud. After I came home, mine was gone. The gap in the display was small enough to ignore if you weren't looking for it, but I always looked. Every time. My mom started introducing me to friends with hesitant qualifiers. She's figuring things out right now, or she's working in the private sector. Her voice would trail off like the sentence didn't deserve a period. At Christmas, my cousin Brittany cornered me between the deviled eggs and the wine rack and asked with a smirk, "So you're what doing? Claims processing now." Yeah, claims processing. That was the cover. I nodded and smiled while my ears rang with the memory of the last extraction I led in Libya, the one that ended with 2 civilians alive because of a rerouted evac I orchestrated mid-mission with no comms. "Dental benefits are amazing," I said flatly. She laughed like I was the joke. Sometimes I almost believed it myself. The fiction of the boring desk job took on layers. A fake LinkedIn profile, a dusty office badge I kept in my glove compartment in case anyone ever got nosy. I used to practice answering benign corporate questions in the mirror so I wouldn't trip up. Meanwhile, in real life, I was flying into crisis zones under 48-hour notice, coordinating multi-agency intel briefings, ghostwriting threat matrices that reshaped foreign policy. The only problem I had no one to tell, no one to decompress with, no one who could even know. Even within the operations, people only saw slivers of me. My clearance meant I oversaw strategy, not camaraderie. They followed my voice in their ear, my predictions in the field, but not my face at the bar after. I became a phantom in fatigues. Some nights, I'd call home from whatever safe house I was stuck in, just to hear someone use my name like I was real. "Hi, Mom," I'd say. "I've got a minute. Just checking in." She'd sigh and ask about my fake quarterly review. I'd fake a complaint about office politics. We both played our parts. Except her role was real, her disappointment, her confusion, her growing detachment. The lie was eating her alive. And it was eating me too. I wasn't built for invisibility. I could function in it, even thrive. But emotionally, it was like oxygen deprivation. Like every time I succeeded, it sank into a black box no one else could open. Every mission completed, every life, saved every commendation, tucked into a folder, with no ceremony, it widened the gap. I watched officers get promotions with parades. I got a handwritten note from a 2-star general, sealed in a file I wasn't even allowed to keep. I once pulled 3 American contractors out of a hostile zone using nothing but satellite pings, weather patterns, and an intercepted WhatsApp voice memo. They never knew who got them home. I watched them reunite with their families on TV. I watched their kids hug them and cry. Then I turned off the screen and made another pot of instant coffee in a basement bunker no one knew I was in. That was the rhythm of it. Do the impossible. Erase yourself. Then go to Thanksgiving and pretend you're still at that desk job with the great 401k. Every time I said yeah, same old a piece of me chipped away. But I held on. Because that was the job. And because the day you break protocol to feel seen is the day people die. I was fresh off a 36-hour return rotation from northern Syria. My team had just finished an asset extraction that nearly collapsed in the 11th hour when one of our informants turned. It was brutal, non-linear comms, a weather complication we couldn't outmaneuver, and a local convoy that shifted too fast to intercept. I'd slept maybe 3 hours total. I had a stitched gash on my left shoulder from shrapnel. I told the medic not to bother with anesthesia, just close it clean. And instead of resting, I'd promised command I'd make an appearance at my parents' Thanksgiving dinner. Because even ghosts have obligations. I changed into civilian clothes in the airport bathroom, applied a little concealer over the yellowing bruises on my cheekbone, and drove straight to the Walker house. The smell of turkey and cranberry sauce hit me like a memory grenade. Everything in its place. Same porch swing, same plastic pilgrim decorations, same people who thought I was a failure. "Aaron's here." My mom called over her shoulder as she opened the door, her smile thinner than I remembered. Inside, my dad was slicing the turkey with military precision while discussing my brother's recent airborne qual with Uncle Henry. "Kid's a natural," he beamed. Didn't flinch on his first jump. I smiled and nodded and ignored the way the pain in my shoulder flared when I reached for a glass of wine. Dinner was the usual affair, lukewarm pleasantries, veiled digs. My cousin Brittany, always on brand, leaned across the table at one point and asked, "So still working at the insurance place? That's gotta be soul-crushing." I was literally coordinating intelligence on the location of a rogue paramilitary group while she said that. I had a secure phone vibrating silently in my jacket, reminding me of the lives at risk if I miscalculated the next move. But sure, soul-crushing. "Still there," I replied with a practiced shrug. "Health plans are riveting." My dad cleared his throat. "Well, I guess not everyone's cut out for the pressure of real service." No one flinched. That's the worst part. That kind of comment didn't shock anyone anymore. The blood in my ears started to buzz. I set down my fork. My mom, in an obvious attempt to pivot, turned to Luke. "Tell them about the leadership award you got last week." And so he did. I listened. I was genuinely proud he worked hard. He was good at what he did. But as everyone clinked glasses and laughed over the perfect soldier son, I stared at the cut of turkey on my plate and wondered if they'd notice if I left before dessert. Then came the final blow. My mom turned to her sister and, loud enough for me to hear, said, "At least one of our kids made us proud." I stood. "I'll help with dishes," I mumbled. In the kitchen, I gripped the sink edge so hard my stitches twinged. I stared at the faucet, blinked once, twice, swallowed it down. The years. The ache. The secrecy. All of it. Brittany sauntered in behind me. "You know," she said, swirling her wine, "my firm's hiring for admin support. I bet I could get you in." "You're good with numbers, right?" I turned to her slowly, every inch of my body screaming from fatigue, and said, "I'll think about it." That night, my secure line rang at 2:13 a.m. Deployment orders. Emergency briefing in 6 hours. I changed in my car, drove straight to the base, left the shame, the fake smiles, and the untouched pie cooling on my parents' counter behind me. I hadn't planned on attending Luke's Ranger graduation. Not because I wasn't proud of him, I was deeply, but because I knew what it would cost me. Another day spent as the family ghost. Another round of polite nods and whispered assumptions, all while wearing clothes that hid my rank and posture, that denied my training. But something told me to go. I requested a single day's leave, filed it under personal bereavement, which in a way felt fitting. I was mourning the version of myself they thought they knew. Fort Carson looked exactly like I remembered, from my childhood's strict fences, white cement buildings, and the unspoken hierarchy of honor built into every formation and folded flag. I parked far from the entrance and walked in solo. No VIP pass, no front row invitation, just a worn leather purse, sunglasses, and my internal compass. I found a seat in the back, familiar enough to observe, far enough to disappear. The ceremony began with standard military precision. National anthem, invocation, a speech by a commandant whose voice never wavered. Then came the recognition phase. Each new ranger called forward achievements, announced families weeping, clapping, snapping photos like they'd captured a piece of immortality. When they called Luke, my whole family stood. Dad in full dress blues, Mom in a navy dress that matched her lipstick. Brittany had a camcorder like it was 2002. Luke's expression was tight and proud, the way I'd trained mine to be years ago. He accepted his tab, shook hands, saluted. I clapped too, quietly, just enough. Then General David Rutledge took the stage. I hadn't seen him in person in months, though we'd debriefed via secure comms just 3 weeks prior. He was sharp, calculated, and too experienced to ever show surprise, except this time. As he scanned the crowd, he spotted me. Our eyes locked. I gave him the same slight shake of my head I had practiced for years. Don't acknowledge, don't break the wall. But something flickered in him. Something more than recognition. He turned back to the microphone. "Before we conclude, I want to take a brief moment to acknowledge a presence here today." I froze. Among us is someone whose contributions to Special Operations Command have saved more lives than I can disclose in this setting. Someone whose work in counterintelligence has shaped the very doctrine we train these Rangers with. No, don't do this. Colonel Aaron Walker, he said clearly. Your service has not gone unnoticed. Head swiveled. I saw my mother's mouth drop open. My father blinked like someone had spoken in a language he didn't understand. Luke turned in slow motion. I stood because there was no longer any point in hiding. A ripple moved through the crowd. Commander Park from a previous joint mission was suddenly approaching, extending a hand. General Walker, he said under his breath. Honored to see you here. And just like that, my two worlds collided. Messily, unapologetically, Luke walked toward me. Aaron, what the hell? I looked at him. It's true. Then my father moved in. You're a colonel in the Air Force. His voice cracked like a man trying to realign a worldview too long out of date. Brigadier General General Rutledge corrected, offering him a salute with just enough gravity to make it stick. And one of our most trusted officers in the field. Everything was happening too fast. Faces turned, words stuck in throats. For once, no one in the Walker family had anything to say. The ceremony ended in a blur, but my truth had detonated. There would be no going back. The silence I had lived in for 12 years had just been shattered by the last person I expected to say my name out loud. We had dinner reservations at a place my mother loved, white tablecloths, dim lighting, the kind of restaurant where servers wear gloves, and water glasses never go empty. It was meant to be a celebration for Luke. That was the plan. But plans had no place in the wake of what happened on that parade field. We sat in stunned silence for the first 5 minutes. My father picked up his menu like it might provide answers instead of appetizers. My mom kept glancing at me, and then quickly away like I might evaporate if she stared too long. Brittany, for once, was speechless, her mouth actually hanging open just a little. Luke broke the silence first. So, General, I raised an eyebrow. You can still call me Aaron. He smiled, but it was hesitant, like he wasn't sure if I was real. You briefed Rutledge. You've been running ops. I nodded, for a while now. Why didn't you tell us? My mother blurted. Her voice was thin, almost panicked. Why would you let us believe you failed? I looked down at the white napkin in my lap, then back up at her. Because you needed to believe something simple. And the truth wasn't simple. It was classified. It still is. My father's fork paused midair. So the insurance job, a cover, authorized, documented, required. He set the fork down slowly, his face unreadable. The waiter arrived, asked if we were ready to order. Everyone nodded too fast, like following a script. I ordered salmon because I didn't know what else to say. It felt safer than explaining I hadn't eaten in 20 hours. After the waiter left, my father leaned in. All these years, Aaron. You let us humiliate you. You let us think you gave up. No, I said. I didn't let you think that. You chose to stop asking. You filled in the blanks because the truth was inconvenient. My mother's voice trembled. But all those birthdays, Christmases, you just disappeared. I was deployed, I said quietly. Or recovering. Or in transit. I missed those things for the same reason I let you believe I'd failed, because people's lives were at stake. Luke exhaled slowly. So that time you showed up with your arm in a sling. Shrapnel, not a fender bender. Kabul extraction gone sideways. My father's eyes snapped up. You were in Kabul. I was in a lot of places you never asked about, I replied. Because you thought you already knew everything. Brittany, ever tactless, finally piped up. So, are you allowed to say anything at all? I looked at her and smiled with just enough edge to cut. Only that I've been in rooms that make the ones you argue in look very, very small. She didn't speak again. Dinner continued in a blur of forced chewing and too much silence. The food might have been good, I couldn't tell. The room was heavy with confusion, pride, guilt, each emotion fighting for air, like overbooked passengers on a sinking plane. But something shifted. My father didn't argue. He didn't bristle. He just stared at me like he was seeing a stranger who looked exactly like his daughter, but carried herself like someone who'd survived something sacred. He had no framework for this version of me. None of them did. But for the first time in 12 years, they weren't trying to fit me into one. They were just listening. The next morning, I woke to a text from my mother. If you're not busy today, stop by before you leave. I have something for you. I stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure what to expect. We weren't a family of olive branches. We were more the sit in silence and pretend it never happened type. but something about last night had cracked something open, however slightly. When I arrived, the house was quiet. My father's car was gone golf, or maybe a meeting with one of his old command buddies. Luke had already headed back to base. It was just my mother and the echo of old expectations clinging to the walls. She led me into the study, my father's domain, a space where war medals outnumbered books and silence was sacred. "This was in the attic," she said, setting a dusty box on the desk. I didn't throw it away. I couldn't. Inside were pieces of the life I'd left behind. My Air Force Academy acceptance letter, a photo of me in uniform, my old leather-bound strategy notebook, even the pressed uniform name patch I'd worn on my first day. "I told myself you didn't deserve to have these," she said, her voice thick. "But I kept them. I didn't really believe you'd given up. I just didn't have another explanation." I sat down slowly, brushing dust from the photo. My 20-year-old self stared back at me, eyes fierce posture, proud the innocence of ambitions still visible. She had no idea what was coming. No idea the truth would cost more than she could imagine, and that even her own family would become collateral. My mom sat across from me. She looked older today, not in years, but in wear. "We were so proud," she said quietly, "and then we felt so betrayed." I didn't know which was true. Turns out, neither was. Or both. I nodded, unsure what to say. "I was angry," she admitted. "But not because you left. I was angry because I didn't know how to love someone I couldn't explain to other people." That hit hard. "Everyone asked about you," she continued, "and I never had an answer. It made me feel like a failure, like I'd done something wrong, so I blamed you." I took a breath. "I never wanted to hurt you, or Dad. But operational security isn't flexible. I didn't choose to be silent. I was ordered to be." She gave a small laugh that broke into something almost like a sob. "We thought you'd just stopped trying, that you'd given up on us." "No," I said. "I gave up on being seen. That's different." We sat in silence, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. Just shared. She reached forward and gently touched the sleeve of my shirt, just above where the scar from Kabul lay beneath the fabric. "Does it still hurt?" I blinked. "Only when people pretend it didn't happen." She nodded her fingers, pulling back like she'd touched something holy. "I want to understand. I don't know how, but I want to." That was all I needed to hear. We boxed up the memories together. Some I kept, some I left behind. But that scar earned in a war no one knew I was fighting felt a little lighter that day. Not healed, but held. And for the first time, I walked out of that house, not as the daughter who failed, or the ghost no one could touch, but as myself. By the time the 4th of July rolled around, it had been nearly 6 months since the day everything changed. My promotion ceremony had been scheduled. The uniform with the single silver star was already hanging in my closet, and for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't dreading a family event. The Walkers held a cookout every year. Same house, same grill, same flag bunting draped over the porch railing. But this year, there was something different in the air. Or maybe it was just me. When I pulled into the driveway, my father was already outside, talking to a group of his old Army buddies men I'd known since I was a kid. Men who used to pat Luke on the shoulder and glance past me like I was a ghost. But today, something shifted. "Gentlemen," my dad said, standing taller, "this is my daughter, Brigadier General Erin Walker, Air Force Special Operations." There was a pause. Then, one by one, each of those weathered men nodded, shook my hand, and offered a word I'd long stopped expecting to hear: respect. Not surprise, not disbelief. Respect. Inside, my mother had done something I never would have anticipated. In the study on the same shelf where my father's medals and plaques were displayed, sat a new arrangement: my academy photo, a cleaned and mounted version of my name patch, and a framed, unclassified commendation certificate. Small, discreet, but unmistakable. I checked with security, she told me when she saw me looking. Didn't want to violate protocol. It hit me harder than I expected. Because it wasn't just a display, it was an acknowledgement. A space made for me in a house that once tried to erase me. Luke manned the grill that afternoon, flipping burgers and calling orders, like he was still in a tactical field exercise. He was relaxed around me now in a way that felt real, not strained, not compensating. "General," he teased, offering me a hot dog with mock formality. "Welcome to the trenches." I laughed, accepting it with a salute. "Been in the trenches. Yours just smell more like lighter fluid. We ate under the patio lights, the usual banter flowing easier than it ever had. The questions came softly, respectfully. What's it like, briefing Joint Chiefs, ever scared? Do you still have to do your own laundry? And I answered what I could. No one pushed. No one rolled their eyes. No one called it luck. When it got dark, the neighborhood fireworks began. I stood off to the side, watching the sky burst open in reds and golds, and that deep cobalt blue that always disappears too fast. My father joined me, 2 beers in hand. He handed me one without speaking. We watched in silence for a while. I've been thinking, he said finally, about what it must have cost you to carry that weight alone. I looked at him, waiting. The uniform doesn't matter, he continued. Not really. What matters is who puts on the burden, who carries it with dignity. I knotted my throat too tight for words. He didn't say he was sorry, not directly. But when he turned to me and said, I'd follow your command, I knew. That was his apology. That was everything. We took a photo that night. All of us. Me and Luke side by side, both in uniform. Our mother standing between us, beaming. My father's hand on my shoulder, firm, steady. For the first time, I belonged in the frame. My promotion ceremony was quiet, precise, and heavy with meaning. No fireworks this time. No flags flapping in suburban breezes. Just rows of officers, tight corners, and a silence charged with the kind of reverence that doesn't need music to feel enormous. Brigadier General, 1 silver star on each shoulder. They pin it on like it's nothing, like it's a natural evolution. But I felt the full weight of every year that had brought me here. Every operation I couldn't talk about. Every family dinner I sat through pretending to be average. Every scar I covered up on my body, on my memory, on my place at the table. They read the official citation, sanitized, a blanket of phrases that meant everything and said nothing. Exemplary leadership in high-pressure operations. Pioneered actionable threat matrices across multi-agency platforms. Strategic oversight resulting in reduced civilian casualties. No one said led a team that saved 12 lives in Moldova. No one mentioned extracted a compromised informant from beneath a collapsing regime. No one would ever know the night I bled into the dirt and still finished the mission. But they were all there, all those ghosts. I looked out into the audience. There were 3 seats marked for family. I didn't know if they'd come. And then I saw them. My mom in a dark green dress, holding her purse like a nervous habit. My father in a tailored suit, instead of his old uniform, his face set with quiet pride. And Luke standing tall in his own army blues, his ranger tab catching the light. When it ended, they came forward. My mother hugged me tight. I always knew, she whispered. I just didn't know how. My father offered his hand first, a firm, deliberate gesture. When I took it, he pulled me into a brief, uncharacteristic hug. Well done, General, he said, voice thick. Luke just grinned. So, we calling you ma'am now? I rolled my eyes. Don't push it. We took another photo. This time not for show. This time for us. I know there are things I'll never be able to say. Stories I'll never get to share. Awards that won't hang on any wall. That's part of the job. Part of the life. There will always be a gap between who I am and who they understand me to be. But it's not as wide as it once was. They see me now. Not all of me, but enough. And sometimes enough is everything. There's something profoundly human about wanting to be seen, not just noticed, but known. For over a decade, I lived in the dark, carrying a truth too classified to share, and a silence mistaken for failure. It hurt, more than I admitted even to myself. But through that pain, I learned something powerful. Recognition doesn't have to be loud, and respect doesn't always arrive on time. But when it does, it lands like a homecoming. Have you ever been underestimated? Misunderstood? Written off because your truth was too complicated to explain? I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. What have you carried in silence? What finally set you free? If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their worth is not diminished by someone else's limited understanding. Some truths remain hidden, but when the right ones come to light, they can heal everything.